Hey there. I'm Elena, a 38-year-old working at an advertising agency. Our family unit is small: me, my husband Jack, and our bright, 8-year-old daughter, Sophie. We're not exactly rolling in dough, but we do all right for ourselves. See, this advertising agency I work for, they take care of us pretty well. I mean, my paycheck is something else, especially compared to what others in similar office jobs are making. Yep, I bring home a pretty hefty salary. Money's never really been a worry, even with Sophie's college fund and our mortgage payments. We've always had a comfortable cushion. Jack was well aware of my high salary, and maybe it bruised his ego a bit. A year ago, he up and quit his web design job to go freelance. He claimed he'd hit a pay ceiling, but I was skeptical. How much could one really earn freelancing? Of course, I objected. It'd be safer to stay put, get those full retirement benefits, then explore other options. But Jack was adamant. So, freelance he went. And just like that, Jack became a permanent fixture at home. At first, I tried to make the best of it. Since you're home more, maybe you could help out a bit with the chores like cleaning and laundry. I'll still cook, of course. Excuse me, why should I do housework? You're home more, you have more free time. He sounded genuinely baffled. It'd just be nice to share the load, Jack. I work too, you know. It should be equal. You've managed fine until now, so don't start complaining. He was convinced he was in the right, completely shutting down any attempt at discussion. So, I continued to shoulder the entire household burden, just like I always had. Look, I get it. Freelancing can be unstable and mentally taxing. That's partly why I didn't want him to quit in the first place. But chores, they're nobody's job, they're just part of sharing a life. I don't want to assume he wasn't busy just because he worked from home. But every night, I'd come home to find him sprawled in front of the TV or glued to his smartphone. Dinner ready? He'd ask, an entitled tone creeping into his voice that never failed to infuriate me. It got worse. He became obsessed with cleanliness. The floor is dirty. The windows are smudged. The bathroom grout needs scrubbing. If you're so concerned, why don't you clean it? I'm only human, Jack. I can't do everything. You're talking back to me. Clean up your own mess. It's our family's home. I'm not the only one making it dirty. His logic was baffling. Sophie would observe these exchanges quietly from a distance, her big eyes taking it all in. You know, Dad's always on his phone, she confided in me one Sunday morning as I made breakfast. I wish we could go out on weekends, but Daddy's always busy on his phone. Apparently, she'd asked him to play the previous evening, and he'd refused without even looking up. It was true. He was glued to that thing. He's been like that since before you come home from work, she continued. Sometimes, he's on calls too. Calls with a woman. A woman? It didn't sound like a client or colleague. As unfamiliar as I was with the freelancing world, a woman's voice set off alarm bells. Could he be having an affair? It wasn't unthinkable. He'd been home for months, with more free time than ever before. I pushed down the fear, not wanting Sophie to see my worry, and focused on scrambling eggs. Months went by. The chores remained mine. Jack, meanwhile, started spending entire days away on weekends. Work to do. Freelancers don't get days off, he'd declare as he left, dressed sharper than usual, even wearing cologne and accessories he never bothered with before. My suspicions grew, but without proof, confronting him was pointless. Besides, even if he was cheating, what then? I was torn. It would be cleaner to separate. but ripping Sophie away from her father, that wasn't an easy decision. Every day, I agonized, weighing the potential consequences for my little girl. And that's how we lived. Until the day everything changed. It was a Monday morning. Sophie was usually up and at M, but that day, she didn't stir. I was already running late for work, and panic started to set in. Sophie, honey, it's morning. You'll be late for her school. Rushing into her room, I found her looking pale and drawn. Sophie, sweetheart. Her skin felt like fire. I grabbed the thermometer. 103 degrees Fahrenheit. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't miss work today, there was an important meeting. Jack walked in. What's going on? Sophie has a terrible fever, and I can't miss work today. Well, call a babysitter then. Babysitter, when had he ever suggested that before? I'll take care of her, he said, as if reading my mind. She just needs to rest. I can make her soup, it'll be fine. I was dumbfounded. Jack, who wouldn't lift a finger to help around the house, now offering to care for our sick daughter, unbelievable. As much as it pained me to admit it, I had no choice but to trust him. Okay, thank you. There's fruit in the fridge, if she feels up to eating. Got it. His response was surprisingly reassuring. I rushed out the door, my mind a storm of worry. Reaching my office in New York City, the sky had darkened considerably. It had started to rain. Thankfully, I always carried a foldable umbrella, so I reached the office relatively unscathed. The meeting went ahead as scheduled that afternoon, but Sophie was all I could think about. The storm raged outside, the wind howling, the rain lashing against the windows. The news had mentioned a hurricane making landfall tonight. I'd been so busy, I hadn't been keeping up with the weather. By 7 p.m., when I finally escaped the office, the storm had transformed into a torrential downpour. The trains were an absolute mess, delays and cancellations everywhere. The platform was jam-packed with frustrated commuters. My anxiety went through the roof. Sophie, burning up with fever, alone in that house, I couldn't bear the thought of waiting. I left the station and desperately searched for a taxi. It took forever, but after 30 agonizing minutes, I finally found one. 30 minutes later, I arrived home. And froze. Sophie, my precious Sophie, was lying unconscious in front of our house. I scrambled out of the taxi, heart pounding in my chest. Sophie. Baby, are you okay? What happened? As if my voice had pierced through a fog, her eyelids fluttered open. Daddy. She whispered, her small body trembling. And then, with a sigh, she slumped back, utterly spent. She was drenched to the bone, but her skin still burned with fever. I rushed back to the taxi and knocked frantically on the window. I'm so sorry, but I need you again. Please, the nearest hospital. The driver, bless his soul, didn't hesitate. He opened the door, understanding the urgency in my voice. The nearest hospital, please, and hurry. Throughout the drive, I held Sophie close, whispering reassurances, praying she'd be alright. Why was she outside in this weather with a raging fever? It was unfathomable. But right now, all that mattered was getting her help. We finally reached the hospital, the rain still coming down in sheets. Ma'am, do take care, especially heading back in this weather, the kind taxi driver said. Thank you, so much, I mumbled, grateful for his compassion. I scooped Sophie into my arms and rushed into the brightly lit hospital. Despite the chaos of a busy ER, the receptionist immediately recognized the urgency of the situation. It still felt like an eternity before a doctor finally examined Sophie. She's semi-conscious due to a very high fever. Fortunately, there are no signs of physical injury. If we can get the fever down, she should be okay, he explained. However, given that she was apparently outside in this weather, with a fever this high, she needs to be admitted immediately. Of course, I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. Don't worry, honey, a kind nurse said, patting Sophie's hand gently. We'll take good care of you. You just rest now. She turned to me, her eyes filled with understanding. You should get some rest too. We'll look after her. After 5 grueling hours of watching Sophie sleep, her small face etched with discomfort, I finally agreed to go home. The nurses assured me they'd call if anything changed. As much as I wanted to stay by her side, I was beyond exhausted. A full day of work followed by the terror of finding Sophie like that. I was running on fumes. Jack. This was his fault. Sophie wouldn't have been outside in that storm unless... Daddy. She had whispered before collapsing. That was all the proof I needed. Rage, cold and sharp, coursed through me. The more I thought about what he'd done, the angrier I became. If he found out Sophie was okay, would he think this was all fine, that he could continue his reckless behavior without consequence? No. Absolutely not. He needed to understand the gravity of what he'd done. He needed to feel remorse. With newfound determination, I hailed a cab and headed home. The rain hadn't let up. I was soaked by the time I reached the house. Jack was inside, casually scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. He looked up, surprised. Hey, where's Sophie? Wasn't she sleeping at the entrance? She said she wanted to play outside. I told her not to, but... He tossed her out with a fever rage, white hot, flooded through me. She just passed away, I said, the words catching in my throat. Jack stared at me, dumbfounded. What are you talking about? Stop with the sick jokes, that's not funny. He actually thought I was kidding. Standing there, soaked to the bone, my daughter lying in a hospital bed because of his negligence, his reaction was almost comical. It's not a lie. What have you done? I whispered, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. I'll handle the funeral arrangements. Stay away from the house for a while. Goodbye, Jack. I turned on my heel and walked out, slamming the door behind me. Are you for real? He called after me, his voice finally revealing a flicker of panic. But even then, he sounded detached, as if this was happening to someone else. I didn't look back. I will never forgive him, I thought, fury burning in my chest. If I have to, I'll drag him down to hell myself. I checked into a nearby hotel and decided to stay there for a while. Money be damned. I wanted revenge. If Jack showed true remorse, if he was willing to change, maybe then. But he hadn't even bothered to call or message me. He clearly didn't care what had happened to our daughter. It fueled my anger. The next morning, I rushed to the hospital. Sophie was awake. Sophie, are you okay? I asked, my voice trembling with relief. Mom. Yeah, I feel much better. My fever's gone. She gave me a weak smile. Oh, thank goodness. I hugged her tightly, burying my face in her hair. Sophie giggled, a sound that was music to my ears. Sophie, sweetheart, I need to ask, what happened yesterday? She hesitated. Daddy, he kicked me out. Kicked you out? He said, He said I was in the way, because he wanted to be with the lady. The woman. My blood ran cold. A woman? What did she look like? I didn't see her very well. She was young, and she had bright red nails, and really tall, skinny shoes. It was true. He was having an affair. And not only that, he brought her home while Sophie was sick, then locked our daughter outside in the middle of a hurricane. Oh, honey. I'm so sorry, I whispered, my heart aching for her. That must have been so scary. It was. But I'm glad you came to save me, Sophie said, her eyes shining with gratitude. To put our daughter through that, and then to celebrate her death, it was unforgivable. My rage returned, stronger than ever. Oh, and Mommy, Sophie added nonchalantly, Daddy said he's inviting that lady over again next Sunday. Next Sunday, the day I was supposed to be on that company trip he was planning to. Thanks for telling me, sweetheart, I said, forcing a smile. My resolve solidified. Jack was going down. The following Sunday, I took Sophie home. I informed my company that due to personal reasons, I wouldn't be able to attend the trip. We'd been staying at the hotel since Sophie's discharge. It felt strange, returning to that house. Like we were entering a stranger's home. We're home, I announced as we stepped inside. Just as Sophie had described, there was a pair of unfamiliar high heels by the door. The thought of them inside, together, made my skin crawl. Jack wasn't in the living room. I hesitated outside the bedroom door. I didn't want Sophie to witness this, but it was quiet. I pressed my ear to the door, listening intently. You know, it really worked out, Sophie being gone, Jack was saying. Made breaking up a lot easier. My blood turned to ice. I mean, yeah, for me it was kind of lucky. He was discussing our daughter's supposed death as if it were a good thing I had heard enough. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Excuse us. They were both startled. Jack's eyes widened in disbelief. Why the hell are you here? He sputtered. You said you were on that business trip. Why is she here? The woman exclaimed. What do you mean? Jack snapped. Sophie's. Wasn't she? Oh, the part about Sophie dying was a lie, I said calmly. I wanted to see your reaction. I was hoping you might show some remorse. Instead, you're here, celebrating. Damn it, Elena, you played with my emotions. Jack shouted, his face red with anger. The nerve of this man. Who's the real coward here? I shot back, my voice shaking. I see no point in staying with someone so heartless. We're getting a divorce. I said it with such finality that even I was surprised. I pulled a business card out of my purse and threw it at him. My lawyer. You'll be hearing from him about asset division and child support. And Jack, once we're separated, I'll make sure your company, and your parents, know exactly what kind of man you are. His face paled. I turned to the woman, who'd been watching the exchange with a mixture of fear and fascination. As for you, you destroyed a family. You need to take responsibility for your actions. And don't ever let me see you anywhere near Sophie again. She stammered, starting to panic, twisting her fingers in her hair. You and Jack, you're in love, I guarantee you, I continued, my voice laced with disdain. You should be able to overcome this. Together. I glared at Jack. I'll leave you the house. But you're still responsible for the mortgage. Wait, what? He sputtered. I ignored him and took Sophie's hand. Yes, she was losing her father. But after what he'd done, I had no regrets. "It's okay, Sophie," I whispered, squeezing her hand. "We'll be okay. Just us." She nodded, her small face filled with a surprising determination. And oddly enough, happiness. Seeing her like that, so strong, it was all I needed. We were going to be just fine. We went to stay with my parents, who were, to put it mildly, furious with Jack. They were ready to give him a piece of their mind, but I managed to calm them down. "Stay as long as you need to, sweetheart," Mom said, pulling me into a hug. "Thank you," I whispered, burying my face in her shoulder. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Jack, I later found out, had hired a lawyer and settled the child support and asset division in one lump sum, which meant he'd taken on a massive debt. Add that to the mortgage, and he was in deep. He'd gotten exactly what he deserved. A colleague of mine from work, who went to high school with him, told me that Jack had broken up with his mistress. Apparently, he'd boasted to her about having money, and she'd run for the hills when she found out the truth. No surprise there. So, there you have it. Jack lost his wife, his daughter, his mistress, and is now drowning in debt, all because he couldn't be bothered to do the dishes. I hope he learned something from all this. Mommy Sophie's sweet voice interrupted my thoughts. Today at school, I made Grandparents' Day gifts for Grandma and Grandpa. Really, I looked down at her, my heart swelling with love. "Let's go give it to them together later." "Okay," she chirped, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Life without Jack was a million times harder. But seeing Sophie so happy, so full of life, it made everything worth it. We were going to be okay. Just us. Life at my parents' house was an adjustment. It was strange, being back in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by dusty relics of my teenage years. Sophie, ever the adaptable soul, took to it with gusto. My parents doted on her, showering her with the kind of attention only grandparents can muster. It warmed my heart to see them bond, to hear her laughter echoing through the house. I went back to work, securing a position at a local hospital. It wasn't the high-powered, fast-paced world of advertising, but it felt right, being back in scrubs, caring for patients. The divorce proceedings were messy, as they often are. Jack fought me every step of the way, trying to minimize his financial obligations. My lawyer, bless her heart, was a bulldog. She didn't let him get away with anything. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was over. I was free. We celebrated with a picnic in the park, just Sophie and me. She'd baked me a lopsided cake, decorated with enough sprinkles to rival a unicorn, and we laughed until our sides ached. Life wasn't perfect. Money was tight, and there were days when I was so exhausted I could barely keep my eyes open. But we had each other. And that's all that mattered. One breezy afternoon, while pushing Sophie on the swings at the park, I noticed a man sitting on a nearby bench, watching us. He looked vaguely familiar, with his tired eyes and defeated slouch. It was Jack. He looked thinner than I remembered, his clothes rumpled, his face etched with a weariness I'd never seen before. Sophie was so engrossed in her swinging, she hadn't noticed him yet. My heart, despite everything, clenched. A part of me, a tiny, foolish part, wanted to run to him, to ask if he was okay. But the rest of me, the stronger, wiser part, held me back. He'd made his choices. He cleared his throat, and Sophie finally spotted him. "Daddy," she whispered, her small body going still. He stood up, hesitantly, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to approach. "Hi, Sophie," he said, his voice raspy. She jumped off the swing and ran towards him. He scooped her up in his arms, and for a moment, they just held each other, as if trying to bridge the chasm that separated them. I watched them, a silent observer to their reunion. He hadn't tried to contact us, not once, since the day we left. I had no idea what he was doing here now. After a while, he set Sophie down gently and turned to me. "Elena," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I met his gaze, my expression unreadable. Can I talk to you?" he asked. I looked down at Sophie, who was gazing up at me with wide, hopeful eyes. I sighed. "All right," I said finally. "But just for a few minutes." We sat on the park bench, a safe distance from Sophie, who'd gone back to the swings. I wanted to apologize," Jack began, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything. I was a terrible husband, a terrible father." He looked so utterly broken that even my anger softened. "I know," I said simply. "I lost my job," he continued, his gaze fixed on his scuffed shoes. "The freelance work dried up. I'm working odd jobs, trying to make ends meet. It's not easy." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to tell him that I knew. Word traveled fast in a small town. I was so caught up in my own ego, my own insecurities. "I took you for granted, Elena. I took Sophie for granted. And I'm so sorry." His words were genuine. I could hear the regret in every syllable. But was it enough? He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate hope. Can I see her again?" he asked. "I know I don't deserve it, but..." I looked over at Sophie, who was now giggling as she slid down the slide. "I can't speak for her, Jack," I said softly. "She's old enough to make her own decisions." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "But," I continued, maybe we can take things slowly. For Sophie's sake." A flicker of hope lit up his face. "Thank you, Elena," he whispered. "Thank you." We sat in silence for a while, watching Sophie play. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. We weren't getting back together. Not now, maybe not ever. But maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to be civil, to co-parent without the bitterness that had poisoned our past. For Sophie. Because that's what parents do. They put their children first, even when it hurts, even when it means swallowing their pride and reaching out to the one who broke their heart. As I watched Jack push Sophie on the swings, a small, fragile hope bloomed in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal. For Sophie. For ourselves. And for the family we once were, and perhaps, one day, could be again.